Ready? The other one? No, by the time you go and come back, this will. Today, you mean? It'll be regularly used, yeah. No, I think by the time you go and come back. Your car is right here? Oh, okay, it's loading the updates now. Okay, we could start with doing the homage to the Buddha. Okay, so today is December 3rd, 2016. Okay, we'll start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Though so far it has not been the best morning. Okay, so we are continuing now with the reading of the Anguttara Nikaya Book of the Ones. And last time I went through the last few items which are mentioned. I call these the aids. There are actually pairs of qualities, which I call the obstacles to the practice of the Dhamma, or to the development of wholesome qualities, and the aids to the development of wholesome qualities. And so we went through the last of these, which are on the negative side, careless attention; on the positive side, careful attention; the negative side, lack of clear comprehension; on the positive side, clear comprehension; the negative side, bad friendship; the positive side, good friendship; the negative side, the pursuit of unwholesome qualities and the neglect of wholesome qualities; on the positive side, the pursuit of wholesome qualities and the non-pursuit of unwholesome qualities. Okay, so these are developed in suttas number 90 through 97, and then the suttas from 98 through 120 through 115 develop these dichotomies in various ways, which are just elaborations on the explanation that comes in the earlier suttas. Now, with Sutta 115, we see another theme is introduced. All of these pairs of negative qualities and positive qualities are now related to this starts actually with Sutta 114. We have the negative qualities contribute to the decline and disappearance of the good Dharma. So heedlessness, the first sutta in the series says that heedlessness is the single thing most responsible for the decline and disappearance of the good Dharma. Whereas in 115, it said that heedfulness, uppamada, or diligence, is the single thing that is most responsible for the continuation, the non-decline, and non-disappearance of the good Dharma. Okay, and then all of these qualities, the negative qualities, laziness, strong desire, non-contentment, careless attention, and so forth, all of these are said to be responsible for the decline and disappearance of the good Dharma, whereas the positive qualities, from heedfulness through the arousing of energy, through fewness of desires, contentment, careful attention, clear comprehension, good friendship, the pursuit of wholesome qualities, these things are said to be responsible for the continuation and non-decline of the good Dharma. Okay, so this theme of the decline of the Dharma, decline and disappearance of the Dhamma, and the continuation of the Dharma, which is introduced in terms of these pairs of contrasting qualities, is now taken up and explored in still further ways in the suttas that unfold from sutta number 130 through 169. And so now maybe I could speak a little bit about what is meant by the decline and disappearance of the good Dharma. This becomes a major theme in, you could say, in the Buddhist tradition. We find it in a number of other suttas, which I have copied onto a USB drive, and I'm waiting for the computer to boot in order to show them. But we find this as a theme also explored in commentaries, treatises. The Mahayana sutras take up this theme about the decline and disappearance of the true Dharma. And then we have different theories about stages of decline and disappearance of the Dharma. The Pali commentaries speak about 5 stages in the decline and disappearance of the Dhamma, or 5 ways in which the Dharma disappears. So the first of these is the disappearance of attainment, or the disappearance of realization. And so, and I have to say that some of these explanations that we find in the commentary, I'm going to relate them, but if I were reading in my margins, I would put question marks around some of them. Okay, so they speak about the decline of and disappearance of attainment or realization. And so the way they explain it, the commentaries explain it, during the age when the Buddha is alive and teaching in the world, and then for some several hundred years thereafter, this is the golden age of the Dharma, when there are many people who reach the higher attainments, especially who reach arahatship, or not simply reach arahatship, but attain arahatship accompanied by a garland of other excellent qualities. They reach arahatship together with the what are called the analytical knowledges, the patisambhida jnana. These are the knowledges that enable the disciple to understand the Dharma in detail and in depth, and to explain it elaborately with great precision of detail. And during this period, many monastics reach arahatship accompanied by these super knowledges or superpowers, so that they can recollect their past lives, see the unfolding of the karmic process of death and rebirth in others. They can exercise the psychic powers, flying through the sky, walking across water, and so on. So during the early period, these attainments flourish. As time goes on, the achievement of the analytical knowledges becomes rarer and rarer. The ability to gain these superpowers declines. The recollection of past lives declines. Arhatship is said to be still available, but all of these accompanying powers and knowledges become rarer and rarer until in later stages it said arhatship is still possible, but only in the mode of what is called the dry insight arhat, one who achieves arhatship just through the power of wisdom without even the attainment of the jhanas and the formless meditations. And then as time goes further by, even the attainment of arhatship becomes almost impossible. There are still non-returners, though. Non-returners, once-returners, stream-enterers. As more time goes by, non-returners become extremely rare species. Then once-returners become rarer and rarer. Then even stream-enterers become rarer and rarer until there are no more attainments even of stream entry. As I said, I put question marks around this because nowadays it's said, at least in some quarters under some meditation, that some meditation masters may have reached arhatship, once returning, non-returning, and have disciples who, it's said, have reached stream entry or even higher attainments. But I have to say also that as technology advances and the commercialization of the world economy, the industrialization, I know that we have some computer people out in the audience here, but as things like computers become more commonplace, cell phones, iPads. So now so many of the monks are spending all of their times on computers and their iPads. So the practice of meditation becomes, from one angle you could say it becomes rarer and rarer. But also, maybe you could say that also the electronic technology makes Dhamma available to more and more people. And now you could get like instructions through YouTube videos from the leading meditation masters. You don't have to travel to Burma, Sri Lanka, Thailand to meet them. So that there are two sides to this issue, and I'm not going to choose sides. Okay, so the first stage in the disappearance of the Dhamma is the disappearance of attainment or realization. The second stage is the disappearance of the practice. And so in this period, not only is attainment out, but the followers of the Dhamma, whether monks, nuns, lay people, are not even seriously practicing. Maybe they're just going through the rituals and ceremonies and devotional practices, but real serious meditation practice becomes rarer and rarer. In fact, this was quite commonplace in the Buddhist world, at least in the Theravada Buddhist world, countries like Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, through up to a good part of the 19th century, that maybe there were some monks living in remote hermitages who were engaged in intensive practice of meditation. But for the Buddhist community at large, the main mode of practice was, doing Bodhi pujas. This is devotional ceremonies in the presence of the Bodhi trees, which you find in most monasteries, doing the, other types of devotional services, maybe having sermons on the Dhamma, which emphasize things, the practices of generosity and moral practice. But serious, intensive practice of meditation had declined to a very great extent. But then maybe starting in the late 19th century, this was a quite remarkable phenomena. Serious monks started to discover the teachings on meditation, and those monks who were practicing in remote places, in the forests, in caves, started to come out and teach first other monastics, and then lay people started to take up the practice earnestly. So beginning maybe the late 19th century and then continuing into the 20th century, I would say that there's been a kind of revival or rejuvenation of serious meditation practice. Perhaps in Tibet, maybe serious meditation practice continued through from the 11th century or 14th century on up to the present. In China, I think that there was serious decline in the practice of the Chan meditation. So the dominant mode of practice then became the Pure Land devotional meditation or devotional recitation. Okay, so the second stage of decline is the decline in practice, particularly the serious practice of meditation. Then the third stage in decline is the decline in learning. That is, decline in mastery over the scriptures, the canonical text and the commentaries, the classical commentaries. In fact, in the Pali commentaries, they speak about the disappearance of various scriptures in stages, as though it's a kind of graduated decline or loss of the sacred scriptures. So because they regard the Abhidhamma as the most abstruse and the most profound body of scriptures, they say that the Abhidharma disappears first, starting with the Patana, that's the book on conditional relations. And so in Burma, where they deeply treasure the Abhidhamma, there's been a kind of revival in study of the Patana, because they think, and recitation of at least portions of the Patana, because they think that the Patana, this last book, is the most vulnerable to disappearance. So to protect and prolong the good Dharma, we have to ensure that there's study of the Patana. Okay, so the Patana disappears, the Abhidharma disappears first, then the Sutta Pitaka disappears, and then finally the Vinaya Pitaka disappears, the book of discipline. And then if I recall, I think in the Mahayana there's also a kind of theory about the disappearance of sutras in different stages. I don't know if anybody is familiar with that here. Right, that's right. The Shurangama Sutra is supposed to disappear first. And so I know in San Francisco there was the Chinese master Xuanhua, who passed away 1993, 1996, something like that. But when he started to teach Westerners or American disciples, the first sutra that he taught was the Shurangama Sutra, with the idea that if we transmit the Shurangama Sutra and have it translated into English, that will protect the Dharma from disappearing. Okay, so we have the disappearance. The third stage is the disappearance of learning. Then the fourth stage is called the disappearance of the emblem or sign or mark. The Pali word here is linga. Let me take one. So this is the disappearance of the linga, the mark or sign. And what is meant by the mark or sign is the distinctive sign of the Dharma, which is the monastic robe. And so it's said that as time goes by, the monks stop wearing their full monastic apparel, but start to adopt the clothing of lay people, except to distinguish themselves as monks. They wear just a square or rectangle of yellow cloth or saffron cloth around their necks. Or you look astonished. So when they're involved, by now one could hardly call them monks anymore, but I guess they're still preserving the monastic ordination. But in their day-to-day life, they wear the ordinary clothes of lay people. Then when it's time to perform some Buddha ceremony, they take a yellow strip of cloth, or saffron strip of cloth, with the band around it and put it around their necks and maybe tie it around the body. So that is showing that they have monastic status. I know some of my friends from the Zen tradition who are married, but they're Zen priests. They joke with me and say, you see, we are the ones who are wearing that yellow strip of cloth around our necks. Okay, then the fifth stage of disappearance is called the disappearance of the relics. And so in a way, what maintains the Buddha Dharma in the world as sort of the last bastion for keeping the Dharma alive are the relics of the Buddha, which are distributed in many places. In fact, if one were to collect all of the relics, they would probably form a mass larger than the physical body of the Buddha himself. But this is because they say that the relics multiply when they're shown devotion, when they're shown reverence and devotion. And I've actually heard about this from people who are even skeptical about the multiplication of the relics. But they've seen somebody who has like a monastery where they keep a Buddha relic, and it's shown a lot of devotion. It's usually kept in a casket, so it's not open. And over time, they'll open the casket to display the relic, and lo and behold, where there had been just one relic, it's one little piece of kind of jewel-like substance. Now there are two or three. And some years ago, there was a relic exhibition that was going through, was being conducted around the world, and it came through the east coast of the United States. And there were relics of the Venerable Ananda. And originally there had been just a casket with a bunch of little small relics, which were about the size of like grains of sand, little pieces of like little pebbles. And then one day during the tour, when the people who were, conducting the tour opened that casket where Ananda's relics were kept, on top of all of those little sand-like relics, there was a large, about this size, substance, looked like a pearl. And I have to say, I trust these people. I don't think that they're conducting a scam, because these are like devout Buddhists. They are disciples of Lama Zopa. He's the founder of the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition, FPMT, a very widespread Buddhist organization. I wouldn't have any reason for thinking that these people want to somehow impress the world by showing that Ananda's relics have multiplied. But there it was. And probably now if you search on I don't want to take time to do that now, but if you search on Google for Ananda's relics, relic exhibition, maybe you'll see photographs of that relic. Okay, so what happens now? All of these Buddha relics are spread out all over the world in different viharas and stupas. So when it's time when the Buddha Sasana reaches its very end, all of these relics, it said, how this happens, they disappear from the place where they're being kept, and they all assemble under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya, forming a mass in the shape of the Buddha himself, sitting in meditation as though he was sitting under the Bodhi tree, having attained enlightenment. So they all assemble there. And then at the precise moment when the Buddha's teaching is to completely disappear from the world, all of these Buddha relics flare up in a great conflagration with intense energy, like it's an atomic bomb that has gone off. Not that it's creating mass destruction, but it's supposed to be that degree of energy, that power. All of the Buddha relics just flare up in this conflagration and then disappear completely. And when that happens, then all of Buddhism is gone in the world. And there are no Buddhist scriptures anymore, no Buddhist monastics, and maybe even the word Buddha. Of course, it would be kept as a word in Indian languages, but the concept of Buddha maybe has even been lost. As I said, this is what the commentary says. I'm not saying that this is fact. And how long it's supposed to take for the Buddha Sasana to completely disappear. The traditional number is said to be 5,000 years, and we've just passed the 2,500. This is according to the traditional chronology, which is actually mistaken. It's known to be mistaken. But it's said that we've recently passed the 2,500 mark. Actually, the 2,500 mark, not recently, it would have been 1956. But that date is based on the assumption that the Buddha was born in the year 624 BC, and it's known by scholars that that is incorrect. It's more likely that the Buddha was born somewhere around somewhere around 520 BC, or even 500 BC. And so that would mean that we haven't even reached the 2,500 mark in the Buddha Sasana. So we're supposed to have still 2,500, more than 2,500 years to go. But I have to say, at the rate that humanity is destroying the climate that provides a sustainable climate, whether human beings are going to survive for another 2,500 years, it's become a big question in my mind. And with the new administration, which has pledged to do everything to develop our fossil fuel capacities, just going to be hastening widespread catastrophe and disaster. Okay, I think I have... Maybe I should ask at this point, let me just get up, call up. Maybe I could ask whether you have any questions on the 5 stages in the disappearance of the Dharma. And remember, I'm not a defender of this taken literally, but okay, so here I've called this section, I call this section 3, Preserving the Good Dharma. And first we have that series of suttas in which the bad qualities are said to be responsible for the decline and disappearance of the good Dharma. And those wholesome qualities, like heedfulness and so on, all the ways through the pursuit of wholesome qualities, are said to be responsible for the non-decline, non-disappearance of the good Dharma. Okay, now we come to a new series which is concerned with other things that contribute to the decline and disappearance of the Dhamma and to the preservation and long life of the Dharma. It's not coming through? Okay, anyway, until this starts operating, I can mention what they are. I'll read the suttas. Okay, so we start with sutta. Okay, we have it now. Okay, so those bhikkhus, and I would have to say we could expand the meaning of bhikkhu to anybody. Bhikkhu, bhikkhuni, male lay follower, female lay follower, who explain non-dharma as dharma. Are acting for the harm of many people, the unhappiness of many people, for the ruin and suffering of many people. They generate much demerit, and they cause the good Dharma to disappear. And then we run through a whole series of items. So the first is explaining non-Dharma as Dharma, then explaining Dharma as non-Dharma. Then we have explaining non-discipline. Is it clear? Okay. Okay, explaining non-discipline as discipline and discipline as non-discipline. The word translated here as discipline is vinaya. So vinaya is the code of discipline that the Buddha laid down for the monastics. So if one says that something which is not part of the monastic discipline is part of the discipline, that is a contributing factor to decline. And if one says that something which is part of the Vinaya is not part of the Vinaya, that is a contributing factor to decline. And so taking these two sections pretty much go together. That is, understanding what is the proper Dharma, that is the doctrine, the formal doctrine, especially as preserved and presented in the suttas, and then understanding what is the proper, correct discipline as preserved and presented in the Vinaya. Yeah. That's too much. Is this okay? Okay. Okay, then comes what okay, so those who then explain what has not been stated and uttered by the Tathagata as having been stated and uttered by him, and then saying that what has been stated and uttered by the Tathagata has not been stated and uttered by him. Okay, and this, I have to say, this pair of statements becomes a bit problematic, controversial, even that can lead to polemical debates, because we have bodies of literature, both in the Theravada tradition and the Mahayana tradition, in which there are sutras which are said to have been spoken by the Buddha, and yet, on the basis of historical scholarship, we can determine certainly that they don't come from the period in which the Buddha himself was alive. And I know on the basis of this, some rather, say, strict and doctrinaire Theravadins then dismiss the whole body of Mahayana sutras and say, this is all distortion of the true Dhamma. This was not spoken by the Buddha himself. And therefore we have to regard it as a body of literature that's contributing to the decline and disappearance of the Dharma. And I have to confess, when I was a good, very orthodox young monk in Sri Lanka, that was my view. But over time, I've come to take a much wider view of the Dharma. And I say, and one point that I find to be very interesting and perplexing is that if we look at the early discourses, that is in the Pali Canon, and in other comparable collections like the Chinese Agamas, we don't find any teaching on the bodhisattva path and practice or the bodhisattva ideal. And yet, if we then adhere to a very strict historical point of view, then we'd have to say, okay, this whole idea of a bodhisattva ideal, bodhisattva path, bodhisattva practice, all of this is later development, not something spoken by the Buddha himself. And yet, in the Pali Sutta, even in the Pali Suttas, the Buddha appears to me clearly as being on a different level, even from his most advanced Arahat disciples. Like he's regarded as the one who, without any teacher, without any guidance, has arrived at the supreme perfect enlightenment. He's the one who brings the light of the Dharma into the world. He is the one who is able to teach extensively and to direct the teaching to the needs and capacities of the people being instructed. And so it would seem to me that there would be some people in the Buddha's audience who would recognize the distinctiveness of the Buddha and then would form the aspiration to achieve Buddhahood itself. Particularly, even in the early discourses, we find the idea that Buddhas arise from time to time, separated by long periods of time. So one would think that there would be some people who would be inspired by the example of the Buddha and take the Buddha himself as the model, the ideal, and then come to the Buddha and say, Bhante, I aspire to follow your path as a bodhisattva. What are the instructions appropriate for me? So one would expect to find discourses like that, but we don't find anything like that in the Pali Canon, or probably in the Chinese Agamas. So doesn't that it seems to me to be almost like a glaring absence. And then the Mahayana Sutras provide those instructions. And so I don't see them, if the Mahayana Sutras were to say, like, these are the requisites for achieving arhatship, and then teach them differently from the teachings that are given in the Pali Canon, then we would say that this is a distortion of the teaching. But the Mahayana Sutras are based on a different ideal, different spiritual ideal, and so a different model of the Buddha's path. And so I don't see them to be in essential conflict with the Pali Suttas, though I have to say that there are things in the Mahayana Sutras that I would put very bold question marks around. But I think that there's a way, to look at the difference between them and to encompass both. Okay, that's my opinion. Maybe there'll be some people who disagree with me, particularly as this goes up on YouTube, and then there'll be maybe a lot of very critical remarks that Bhikkhu Bodhi has sold out his Theravadan heritage. But, and this is another point, even within the Theravada tradition, we find whole bodies of literature which are ascribed to the Buddha, which probably on historical grounds can be regarded as of later origin. So within the living Theravada tradition, do you know what the ABC of the Theravada tradition is? A stands for a work called the Upadana. This is a text in the Sutta Pitaka which narrates the past life deeds of merit and past life practices of the great disciples or the Arahat disciples of the Buddha. So in collections of poems, both the monks and the nuns relate what were the deeds and practices that they undertook in their previous lives that served as the supporting conditions for them to achieve arhatship under the Buddha. So that is the A of the Theravada tradition. The B, what is the B of the Theravada tradition? Anybody know? There's a work called the Buddha Vangsa. The Buddha Vangsa, the work means, the name means the Chronicle of Buddhas. And this is a short work which begins with the story, a story that's common to all the Buddhist traditions, about how the Buddha Gautama, in a past life, aeons and aeons ago, was an ascetic by the name of Sumedha. And in that life, he met a Buddha, the 24th Buddha going back in cosmic time. He met a Buddha named Dipankara. And he was so impressed by the Buddha Dipankara that he bowed down at the Buddha Dipankara's feet, and in his mind, he made the vow or aspiration to achieve Buddhahood in the future. In other words, at that time, he generated the bodhicitta, the aspiration for Buddhahood. And then the Buddha Dipankara looked down at him, at this ascetic Sumedha, and gave the prediction or the prophecy that after so many aeons, this ascetic will become a Buddha named Gautama and teach the Dhamma for the benefit of devas and human beings. And then the Buddha Vangsa relates the stories about the 23 other Buddhas and how the Bodhisattva Gautama, who has become the Buddha Gautama, met those Buddhas and made the vow or continually renewed his vow or aspiration to achieve Buddhahood and received the predictions from those Buddhas. So in many of the Buddhist temples in Sri Lanka, this is a standard motif, one will find on the wall of the Buddha hall a series of panels which will show the 24 past Buddhas and the Buddha, the one who is the Bodhisattva who is to become the Buddha Gautama, forming his aspiration at the feet of those Buddhas. So that is the B of the Buddhist, Theravada Buddhist, popular Buddhism in the Theravada countries. The C of popular Buddhism, what is the C? It's a work called the Charya Pitaka. The Charya Pitaka relates, it's a series of Jataka stories in which the future Buddha Gautama as a bodhisattva fulfilled each of the 10 paramitas. And so those are the works that form the basis for so much of the sermons and discourses and devotional practices in Theravada countries. And yet they're, by scholars, they're all regarded as being, we call apocryphal. That means that they're of later origin, but inserted into the canon. And then the D of the Theravada tradition is the Dhammapada, which of course it's canonical and probably a lot of it stems from the Buddha himself. But when monks are explaining the Dhammapada, they will rely on the Dhammapada commentaries, which contain stories from the life of the Buddha, which, whether they're true or not, we don't know, but they're certainly, or probably a lot of them are of later origin. Okay, we skip over E, F, G, H, I. Then we come to the J of the Theravada tradition. What is the J? Certainly you know that. What is it? Right, the Jatakas. So the Jatakas are stories about the past lives of the Buddha Gautama, when he was maybe an elephant king, or could be a merchant, could have been a king himself, a human king, a prince, a bird, the head of a flock, the chief of a flock of birds, a monkey king, an ascetic in the forest, a tree spirit, many, many different past lives. And they're all, the Jatakas are supposed to illustrate how the Buddha fulfilled certain good qualities. Though sometimes many of the Jatakas really serve more either have primarily entertainment value or else simple ethical value, conveying a simple ethical message. And yet it's said that all of these stories were related by the Buddha himself. So I just want to show that the Buddhist tradition, I would say that the Buddhist tradition becomes richer by the variety of its teachings and literature. And so if we remove the Jataka stories and the Buddha Vangsa account, I'd say that the Buddhist tradition becomes impoverished. We lose this, and the Dhammapada stories, then we lose this very vast, instructive, and sometimes inspiring body of narrative literature. Okay, let us continue. Okay, so we have what has been stated by the Tathagata, not stated by the Tathagata, what has been practiced by the Tathagata, and not practiced by him. Then what has been prescribed by the Tathagata, those are the things that have been laid down. And generally this word prescribed refers to monastic rules. Though it could also be taken to refer to things like the 5 precepts, the 10 courses of wholesome and unwholesome action. But these are things that are laid down as modes of practice, whereas the things that are stated or uttered are more things like the doctrinal principles that have been expounded. Okay, so those are the things that lead to the decline and disappearance of the Dharma. Then the next series of suttas just present the converse of that. Those things that lead to the preservation and long life of the Dharma. So this means that one should be explaining non-Dharma as non-Dharma, Dhamma as Dhamma, non-discipline as non-discipline, discipline as discipline, and so forth, down to explaining what has not been prescribed by the Tathagata as not having been prescribed by him, and what has been prescribed by the Tathagata as having been prescribed by him. Okay, maybe before I ask for questions, maybe I'll go through the next series, which is just an elaboration. I see the next series is pretty much an elaboration of this principle of distinguishing what has been prescribed by the Tathagata and what has not been prescribed by him. So it takes up the idea of an offense. This is an offense against the monastic rules. The word that's used here is apatti. Okay, this is a little sort of short lesson in monastic discipline. Okay, so first there comes the general statement. Those who explain what is not an offense against or a transgression of the monastic rules as a transgression are said to be leading to the decline and disappearance of the Dharma. And then the converse of this is explaining what is a transgression or an offense to be no offense. Then we have a distinction is being made between a light offense, to explain a light offense as a grave offense, to explain a grave offense as a light offense. So there's a distinction made amongst the different categories of monastic rules. And so I listed them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7 types of monastic rules. The most serious is called a parajika. The parajika is a rule that if it's transgressed, then it means that one loses one's status as a monastic. One has to leave the sangha, leave the monastic order. So for monks, there are 4 parajikas, 4 rules that lead to expulsion from the order. One is to engage in sexual intercourse, which can be either heterosexual or homosexual. No distinction is made. To steal an item, the value of which would entail some kind of legal penalty, like imprisonment or a fine. The third is to take the life of a human being, either with one's own hand or by instructing somebody else to do so. And then the fourth is making false claims to supernormal attainments, like attaining the paths and fruits, or even making a false claim to attain the jhanas. So those are for monks. There are, I think, 8 parajikas for bhikkhunis. We don't have to go into all of them. Okay, then comes the sanghadisesa. A sanghadisesa is a transgression that is not so serious that one has to be expelled from the sangha, but it has to begin with a meeting of the sangha in which one has to confess the offense in a meeting of the sangha, and then one has to undergo certain loss of privileges and certain series of punitive actions that have to be maintained over at least a week if there's been concealment of the offense, even a longer period. And then at the end, when one fulfills those penalties, then the sangha has to come together. I believe it's a sangha of 20 monks have to come together, so it requires a large body of monks. And then the offender has to be rehabilitated in the presence of the sangha. So examples of rules like this: masturbation. I should say masturbation. This is for a monk leading to emission of semen. Lustfully touching a woman. Lustfully speaking lewd words to a woman. And there are other things included in this class. Okay, the tulachaya is a transgression which is approaching a parajika or a sanghadisesa, but stops short of the full commission of the offense. So we translate this as a heavy offense Okay. Okay, a pachitya is a rule, a transgression that can be cleared by confession just to one other monk, or if it's in the case of a bhikkhuni, to another nun. So this is the most numerous class of transgressions. So most transgressions, these are relatively minor, so they can be cleared by transgression, the transgression can be cleared through confession to another monastic. Though some of these pachityas also require, if it involves the obtaining of an illegitimate item, that item has to be given up, relinquished. And this includes accepting cash or money. It has to be given up, or items purchased by oneself with money have to be given up, and then the transgression confessed. Okay, pati desaniya, this is really very similar to the pachitya. It's a group of four very small transgressions that can be cleared by confession. And then the weakest class of offense are dubhasita, which is a kind of crude speech, particularly an offensive speech by one monk to another, sort of abusive type of speech. And then dukkhata means dubhasita means badly spoken, and dukkhata means badly done. And dukkhata includes a whole multitude, probably the most numerous, of very, very small transgressions that can be cleared by confession. Oh, how cute. It went by very quickly. Did you see it? I don't know what it is. The system just brings it up. I have nothing to do with it. Okay, so factors that are said to lead to the decline of the true Dhamma is explaining a grave offense as a light offense. The grave offenses are the two top ones, the parajika and sanghadisesa. So saying that those transgressions are light, that is a factor leading to decline. And then explaining a light offense, actually I took them in reverse, explaining a light offense, that's one of the 5 lower types, to be a grave offense. Okay, then coarse and not coarse. The coarse is said to be synonymous with the grave offense, and the not coarse is synonymous with the light offense. Okay, excuse me. A remediable offense, this is an offense from which one can be cleared through the appropriate procedures. That includes all of the offenses except the parajika. The parajika is the irremediable offense. That is a transgression from which there's no way to be cleared. There's no way to be cleared from that offense, but one has to be expelled from the order of bhikkhus, or case of women, bhikkhunis. But this is an important qualification that I should make. If a monk commits a parajika offense, he loses his status as a bhikkhu, but it doesn't mean that he loses his status completely as a monk, because he can then take ordination as a samanera, a novice monk, and remain for life as a samanera, as a novice monk. And perhaps the same is true for women. This I'm not so sure about. But I know in Sri Lanka I know a few monks who had been bhikkhus, and then through some just sometimes these tempting situations occur, and they committed a parajika, but immediately regretted it, and they really wanted to lead their whole life as monks, as renunciants, but they cannot take full ordination again as a bhikkhu. And so they take ordination as a samanera, as a novice, and they continue to lead very good monastic lives as novices. It's just that through a careless slip, loss of mindfulness, loss of resolution, they commit the transgression. Of course, if one commits a murder, I don't know anybody who's committed murder and then becomes a novice. Of course, if you commit murder, you have to be taken care of by the legal authorities. Similarly, if one commits a robbery or an act of theft of a very valuable item, then one is responsible to the legal authorities. But in the case of the first transgression and the fourth, those are transgressions entirely within the scope of monastic life. They don't have any legal repercussions. Okay, then an offense with redress, to be explained as one without redress. Redress means rehabilitation, a process of rehabilitation. So all of the offenses except parajika have redress. That is, if one undergoes the proper procedure, one can be rehabilitated and continue as a fully ordained monk or nun. One without redress is the parajikas. If one commits that, one loses one's status as a bhikkhu or bhikkhuni. And so all of these statements are intending to lay down or to emphasize the importance of keeping the distinction between these different classes of offense, keeping those distinctions intact. And then the next series of suttas just present the converse, the importance of explaining and no offense is no offense, explaining an offense as offense, and then maintaining the distinction between those different classes of offenses. Okay, at this point we can have some time for questions, if you have any questions. Should have. Okay, Matt, and please take the microphone.
Thank you. It just occurred to me on the last point, the person who becomes the novice, is there any way he is distinguished from the rest of the members of the Sangha by dress or?
Okay, that's a good question. Whether he's distinguished from the bhikkhus by dress. No, there's no distinction in apparel. They continue to wear, the regular monastic robes. Within the Theravada tradition, the monastic robes are all the same. Like somebody who is the Mahanayakataro, that is like the head of a particular contingent of the Sangha. Like in Sri Lanka, there are 4 or 5 Mahanayakataros. They will wear the same kind of robe that a little monk like me is wearing, or that a novice is wearing. It's all the same cut. Yeah, so the way people see them, there'll be no distinction. It's just that, say, when the monks proceed in a line, then the novices will follow the fully ordained monks, and the fully ordained monks proceed in order of seniority according to the number of years they've been monks. So the one who's transgressed, he will be with the novices. We take the microphone.
Can the young man be ordained again after they commit it, become a novice monk, or is the or the expelled from being a bhikkhu is for life.
Yeah, if they commit the parajika,
Yes,
they can't become a bhikkhu again.
for life.
Yeah, for life, but they can become a novice.
I'm wondering. I know in the Theravada, a man can disrobe 7 times.
Yeah.
So it means that he cannot commit the parajika before he disrobe, right?
I'm not quite sure that
I mean.
Okay, if he wants to disrobe, okay, he's not committed a parajika, so he decides he doesn't want to live as a monk, he can give up the robe and then become a lay person.
And then he can
Then later he can
bhikkhu
become a
again,
monk again. And when he becomes a lay person, then he can, he can marry and have sexual relations. And then he wants to renounce again. Then he undertakes, he wraps up his worldly affairs. Then he can become reordained in good standing. Is that Matt again? Okay.
In European history, you had the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, then the Renaissance, the Risorgimento. You had the Renaissance of learning.
Yeah.
So is there, in terms of the stages declining, is there any sense that now where there's a sort of renaissance of learning and...
I mean, this is what they say. In fact, there's a tradition that they say that when... I haven't seen it in any commentary or classical text, but this is a belief that's spread around the Buddhist world that when the Buddha Sasana, when Buddhism reaches its halfway mark, that's the 2500th anniversary of the Buddha's passing away, there's supposed to be a renaissance of Buddhist practice and learning and maybe attainment. And then they say since 1956 marked the halfway mark in the history of Buddhism, so that is supposed to be the time that this renaissance takes place. And so...
Right on schedule.
Yeah, so it's said that because of like the renewed emphasis on meditation practice, especially coming out of Burma and Thailand and then spreading to Sri Lanka as well and to other countries, that this is confirms that popular belief that the halfway mark is the time for a renaissance of Buddhist practice and learning. Yeah, and about this belief in the disappearance, the gradual disappearance of the scriptures, it seems to me that this all is based on the premise that the scriptures are being transmitted orally, from generation to generation through memorization. But once printed books come into existence, and now we have everything on CDs, DVDs, and downloadable from the internet, like right here. We have the entire Burmese Sixth Council Tripitaka. Excuse me?
It's in the cloud. It will be preserved to the end of civilization.
It seems, yeah, because it's all not only in the cloud, but on hard disks. It seems that the scriptures should last as long as electronic technology lasts. And the printed scriptures should last as long as printed books endure. But of the Patana, which consists of six big volumes, only 2 volumes have been translated into English. Yeah, please.
I just want, make some, the Buddha teaching get enlightenment at age 35, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he teaches, he passed at 80.
Age of 80, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, he taught about the 40-something years.
45 years, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I was just thinking, you know, in Theravada tradition there are only 4 Buddhist suttas, right? Nikayas. Only 4 Nikayas.
Actually,
right?
5 Nikayas, yeah.
5 Nikayas.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, you know, 40 years only teach that much.
45 years, yeah.
Yes. So if you think about, you know, he keep talking. He just talking, teaching, right?
Yeah.
So basically, the teaching, if you put it in words, it's going to take, you know, much more.
Yeah, but probably what would be said is that he would have repeated basically the same discourses over and over on many different occasions, since he traveled all over. So, you know, if he gives a discourse at Savatthi and then next week he travels to Rajagaha, then he will repeat the same discourse, travels to well, the area which is near Kamasa Dhamma, that's in the Kuru country, then he'll repeat the same discourse there, travel to Varanasi, repeat the same discourse there.
What are the 5 Nikayas? You know, like Digma.
Yeah, the Digha Nikaya,
Sam-
Majjhima Nikaya, Sangyutta, Anguttara. Then the 5th is the Khuddaka Nikaya.
Okay.
And the Khuddaka Nikaya, it's a very big and the contents are quite miscellaneous. And so the texts that are regarded as of later origin, like the Upadana, but I mentioned the ABCs, the Upadana, Buddhavamsa, Charya Pitaka, and the Jataka collection comes within the Khuddaka Nikaya.
In Mahayana, there are 12 of them.
There,
Yeah, right. Yeah, there are 12.
no, not 12 Nikayas. This is a different,
No Nikaya.
this
I
is a
mean,
classification of teachings according to type rather than
Right,
according to
Yes.
the collection. So according to types, in the Pali Suttas mention 9 types.
yes. In
One is called Sutta, Gaya, Gata, Vyakarana, Udana, Itivutaka, Jataka, Adbhuta, Dhamma, that's 8. There's a 9th, Vedala, the 9th one.
yeah.
So we have 9 mentioned in the Pali Suttas. Then, this is probably certainly pre-Mahayana, coming from other early traditions, would have added 3 other categories. I don't remember what they are.
One of them is like prophecy.
The prophecy?
Yeah.
Well, that is another way of understanding the word Vyakarana. Vyakarana originally meant explanation or elaboration, but it was taken then to mean, that same word was taken to mean the prophecy or prediction that a Buddha will give to others, whether to achieve Buddhahood in the future, or to become a great disciple in the future, or to achieve the status of a chief disciple in the future. I think we have to break now for the lunch. Did you have a question?
There's a question on the internet.
Oh, okay.
It's about the interpretation of the disappearing of the sacred text.
Yeah.
Is it possible to interpret as the text is there, but no one correctly interpreted it, no one pay attention to it?
Possible, yeah, possible. Okay, so we have to end our session now with the sharing of the merits. Okay, so we share the merits with the devas, the Dharma protecting deities, the Naga spirits or dragon spirits, the Bhutas, the fair spirits, and with all beings. Asking them to protect the Dharma, to protect the desana, the teaching of the Dharma, to ensure that it is preserved and lasts long in the world. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Bhavagopadaya avici hetato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha sanya sanino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibbutting. Okay, after the lunch, let's say 12:15, 12:20, we could have a little discussion period. Okay, so let us end with the 3 half bows to the Buddha.